Hey guys, this is College Studios here, and welcome back to another edition of the What If series, where we take a look at different what if possibilities for a variety of different situations in the coaster world and see how they would play out and how much they would change the parks that they're affecting. For this one, we are taking a look at what if, instead of Batman and Robin the Chiller, Six Flags Great Adventure got a clone of Mr. Freeze that also went to Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags St. Louis in 1997/1998. Now, these rides have a really interesting history because all three of them were purchased at the same time from Premier Rides, who were kind of a pioneer in the 90s of making LIM launch coasters. They started with Flight of Fear, and then they kind of kept going from there, and Six Flags seemed to be very interested by this new technology and the new company because they really hadn't done much prior to this. So they took an interest in their launch coaster model and wound up ordering 3, technically 4, across their parks for the 1997 season. Now, these coasters were all planned to coincide with the new Batman and Robin movie, which we all know wasn't really that good, but that wasn't known at the time. It was expected that it would be a big hit and that this would help them market the ride along with the movie. So for Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags St. Louis, they bought this coaster called Mr. Freeze, which was a really great layout. I've personally had the opportunity to ride both of them, and they are just phenomenal, excellent rides, and they were both going to those respective parks. Now for Great Adventure, because Great Adventure has always been this much bigger park, it has this big reputation to uphold, they wanted to go a little bit bigger than just Mr. Freeze. So they decided to get a dueling version of this and call it Batman and Robin the Chiller. Still with that Mr. Freeze kind of theme, but focusing more on Batman and Robin. There are two sides, the Batman side that featured an inverted top hat, and the Robin side, which featured a Cobra roll, with both of them having a 0G roll that led up into a spike sloped at around a 45-degree angle before going all the way back through. Now, these layouts differed quite a bit from the Mr. Freeze coasters. Mr. Freeze featured a launch that went into an inverted top hat, much like the Batman side, but then from there it went through an overbank turn, and then a really impressive vertical spike that went over 200 feet. Now, on paper, both the Mr. Freeze coasters and the Chiller were both going to be great additions to their respective parks. Their openings were definitely a little troubled though. Chiller actually wound up opening before everything in 1997, only for a very short amount of time before it was closed, and it did not reopen until 1998. The Mr. Freeze coasters did not open at all until 1998, so they didn't directly coincide with the Batman and Robin movie, but they still did wind up opening. And of course, they were both kind of plagued, all of them were plagued with some amount of technical difficulties. These coasters are fairly complicated, especially with that spike where you have the LIMs going up the spike. Not something that is really done nowadays because getting to those for the sake of maintenance is not very easy. But Chiller, as time went on, definitely had far more mechanical issues than the Mr. Freeze coasters ever did, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were drawing way too much power. Now, they could run one side with very minimal issues. There would still be, the occasional downtime and everything. It wasn't the most reliable coaster, but if you ran both, it just was not going to work. They pretty much never ran both outside of a couple commercial shoots because it would cause brownouts across the town and the park, and it just was not a great combination. So the Chiller coasters would wind up being removed in 2007 after a series of modifications and all sorts of things that wound up just not working themselves out, and the company decided to remove the coasters as that would be the best route to go. Now, the Mr. Freeze coasters, on the other hand, still stand operating to this day as of the time of this recording, with them going through a couple of changes, nothing very significant. The most significant they really had was repaints and switching the train direction from forwards to backwards and then back from backwards to forwards. It's about all of the changes that they have had. Now, I've spoken to numerous people, including my dad, who have had the opportunity to ride all of these coasters, the Batman side of Chiller, the Robin side of Chiller, as well as both Mr. Freeze coasters, and my dad does think that the Mr. Freeze coasters are quite a bit better than Chiller was. Chiller's still a great ride, however, the Mr. Freeze coasters overall were better. And they're not just better from a ride experience perspective, evidently they're much better from a maintenance perspective as well. So knowing this kind of gave me the idea to imagine, well, what if instead of getting Chiller, Great Adventure did get a clone of Mr. Freeze? Whether it be the variant at Over Texas or St. Louis, it doesn't really matter, they're just mirror image versions of each other. How would that fit into the park, and would it still be here today? Well, what I did is opened up No Limits and figured out how to make it work in the park. Of course, huge shout out to Radzad Productions for the Great Adventure Park file, which is the same file you've been seeing used across the different videos I've been making with No Limits. But with this, I wanted to see how I could make it fit so it would get rid of the least amount of rides as possible. As far as I know, a big reason why they opted to do a different version of Great Adventure was because the Mr. Freeze layout in their minds didn't work as well at Great Adventure, so I wanted to see how I could contort it and make it work. Now, of course, we're looking at 1996, 1997 versus 2010 or even 2020, so there were a lot of rides there that are no longer in the park anymore. So what I tried to do was make it so that some of the newer rides that have come in that are very close to where Chiller was would still work in their existing plots right now, while also trying to keep some of the older rides in as much as possible. That way they wouldn't have had to be removed. Because when Chiller was closed in 2007, that was essentially the death of Old Country. Not long after that, basically the whole area was closed. It was closed for a really long time, all the way until Justice League opened in 2017, when they started redoing that whole area. So in this kind of timeline, that never really would have happened. They wouldn't have had to close the whole area because Mr. Freeze never would have closed. So as you can see, I decided to put the station for Mr. Freeze pretty much right by where Freefall / Wonder Woman is now, right by that kind of turn into Metropolis, now what was Old Country. That way you launch into Old Country, and instead of having the top hat where it was for Batman and Robin, that's essentially where the station is for Mr. Freeze. So it's almost kind of reversed a little bit. The back spikes of Batman and Robin the Chiller, kind of similar to where I have the giant inverted top hat as well as the spike for Mr. Freeze here. The only thing that's a little strange is probably the fact that you have to walk underneath the overbank, and I imagine you probably have like a nice plaza there where you could have maybe a snack stand or something like that. It would definitely be different than Chiller, I won't lie about that, but I think it would be really cool, and you would still be able to keep the majority of the rides that were there back then. Spin Meister, Music Express, pretty much unaffected by the placement here of Mr. Freeze, as well as Movietown Water Effect, which is pretty much in the same plot as Dark Knight. It just ran a little bit further. That was their giant splashdown attraction, which wound up closing around the same time as Chiller. Now, what this placement of Mr. Freeze allows for is that Dark Knight can actually still be built in the exact same spot, because this does not interfere with that at all. The really main rides that this would interfere with are the newer editions of Metropolis other than Wonder Woman. So you got Justice League, Cyborg, and Flash. Justice League, I imagine, would just be moved a little bit into a different spot. Around this time, Batman Stunt Arena wasn't really being used as much for the Batman Stunt Show, and I still think it really does need to be torn down, quite honestly. So who's to say they wouldn't have put Justice League there instead of putting it where Mr. Freeze is now standing in this timeline? As for Cyborg, I don't really know what they would have done with it. I mean, it's gone now anyway, so kind of an insignificant ride anyways. Wonder Woman probably would have stayed in the same spot. Flash probably never would have needed to go here because, as we know, Flash was a bit of a last-minute addition anyway. So putting it next to an already existing multi-launching shuttle coaster, not really needed. So you could put it there. It would still work. It would look a little ridiculous having two shuttle coasters right next to each other, but it would still work nonetheless. I imagine what they would have done with this area is probably kept Autobahn, kept pretty much all the elements of the Old Country area, and maybe down the line retheme them to go more in line with DC. Maybe had an extension of the Batman area over there, because technically you have Batman and Dark Knight on one side, then you have Wonder Woman, and I guess Justice League would be where the Stunt Arena is, then you have Mr. Freeze, so probably get a few more Batman villain-themed rides over in that area to pad it out a little bit more, maybe some Justice League members as well, and have that whole area become DC Universe. And like I said, I do think this would still be operating. I mean, the other two Mr. Freeze coasters are still operating at their respective parks, and it really wouldn't have changed Great Adventure too much. It just would have led to us having a bit of a stronger coaster collection as the time went on, because instead of Old Country sitting completely vacant for over a decade, we would have had a lot going on in that area because Mr. Freeze would be there and the area never would have closed. Now, I'm sure there were other reasons that they had for not putting a clone of the Mr. Freeze coasters here and instead going with Batman and Robin the Chiller, but either way, it's fun to theorize about what could have been if instead of Batman and Robin the Chiller, Great Adventure built a clone of Mr. Freeze in 1997/1998. Now, if you guys enjoyed this what if video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, guys.